There are no shortage of options for the Dolphins and their potential exit path with Tua Tagovailoa. Today on the show, we're going to explore one of my least favorite ones.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. I want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it. Here on the Locked On Network. Special thank you to each and every one of you who have helped to make the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network in the world. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Today on the show, there's been some more buzz around. I've tried my best not to do a bunch of Tua Tagovailoa pilled podcast episodes that are deep dives into this situation. But it is one that lingers and looms, and almost everything should be considered on the table for the Dolphins as far as ways to move forward. And everybody has a different opinion. And I know that there's a collection of this fan base that says if you have to pay him and you're going to pay the money, you should let him be here and he should compete. And if he's the best guy to play, then he should play. I know there's a group of people that just want to say on the complete other end of the spectrum, I don't care what it costs. The road is closed. It's time to transition. It's time to move on. I don't want to see him back on the roster. I understand there's people that are willing to pay more of the contract than others. And there's some that want to move a draft pick to get rid of all the money. And there's some that want to keep all the draft picks. And there's some that are willing to play the salary cap game with the contract and, soften the blow and spread it out over a period of time, especially now that you've gotten rid of some of your other salary cap debts. And I would expect that will continue with names like Minkah Fitzpatrick, who's still here, and potentially Austin Jackson, who's still here. And you have some other trade pieces that are of interest that maybe you get a great offer for, but you want to have the flexibility to execute those. There's so many layers that go into this, and I understand everyone's individual school of thought, right? And I very firmly believe that giving away draft compensation to move on from a contract, for me, that's not my cup of tea, right? Like I don't like this idea at all. We're talking about draft picks being the lifeblood of the franchise, and they are a paramount piece of the puzzle, and we're going to build through the draft. And that's the school of thought that we hear. And then to also say, we will give away draft compensation to move on from and avoid cap and cash implications just feels like it's not prioritizing the right thing for me personally. But I'll say this. Whether it was the 2020 draft or whether it was the Tyreek and Bradley Chubb trades or it was the Tua extension or the Mike McDaniel hire or the GM hire that we just went through or the 2021 draft, which was a pivotal draft, I have tried my best with this platform to present and prepare for all outcomes so that when something happens, we can react and understand the why. So today on the show, we're looking at the offloading theory of the Tua contract that would involve draft compensation as a part of a package with Tua Tagovailoa to send to another team to effectively get a team to buy the contract from you, and you give draft compensation in return for money. The Dolphins were a part of a trade like this not that long ago. It wasn't anywhere near the magnitude of what we're talking about now. I don't know if you guys remember Aqib Talib, the cornerback. The Broncos traded Aqib Talib to the Dolphins. I think it was in 2019. And it was the Dolphins sent a 2022 7th-round pick, which is literally the least amount of anything that you could give, right? Because you could only trade 3 years in advance. So it was a 7th-round pick 3 years from now. The Dolphins sent for Aqib Talib and a 5th round pick in the 2020 NFL draft. The most famous example of this is probably the Brock Osweiler trade, which was like Osweiler and a 2 for a 4, right? And the value of Brock Osweiler in that deal ended up being like a 3rd round pick to go with the higher pick to go out and to get rid of a contract. So this has some precedent across the league. Again, full disclosure, this is not what I would do. But it does. I do notice when, whether it's ESPN or NFL Network, and this idea keeps coming up, right? And it could just be information season. It could be, playing the game publicly and drumming up interest and getting enough teams to, if there are teams that are interested in discounted rate Tua to kind of figure out where everybody sits on that fence. It could just be that. But it's come up enough times that I do feel like we should be prepared. Not saying that is imminent. I don't think it's the most likely of outcomes. I think you would need a perfect storm to have something like this to come together. But it is on the spectrum of possibilities, this buyout or offloading of a contract by using draft capital to do so. So the first thing you have to do is you have to identify who's the quarterback market, and whether that's for an unquestioned starter or whether that is for somebody to compete / a backup. So what I want to do right now is I want to kind of go through the teams in the league and acknowledge who could be in the quarterback market. And then after the break, we will whittle some of those teams down and say who has more or less draft capital, who has more or less cap space, who might have the appetite to take on this contract, right? And what percentage of it would they be willing to take? So let's start with the draft order itself. The Las Vegas Raiders most certainly are a team that needs a quarterback. So are the New York Jets. So are the Arizona Cardinals. The Cleveland Browns, although their cap situation is not a particularly friendly one once you consider the Deshaun Watson contract that is still fully guaranteed, that he's going to have like 9 figures in dead cap when they restructure that contract again before it voids. They pick 6. There's a need there at quarterback, though. The Atlanta Falcons, who finished the season 8-9, with Kirk Cousins probably on the outs, Michael Penix injured, Kevin Stefanski, there's some level of need there at quarterback for the Falcons, just like the Colts. If they move on, like how much did they really believe in what they saw from Riley Leonard as a late round draft choice to go with Daniel Jones, who needs a new contract because he signed a 1-year deal, and are they going to offload and trade Anthony Richardson? Minnesota with J.J. McCarthy is a team that has some level of a need. Let's see, a little further down, you run out pretty quick. I'd say probably non-playoff teams are the ones here, because as I'm looking at, people like the Rams, Stafford's already committed to coming back. They're a team that's getting ready to pay a ton of young talent on rookie contracts. I'd be surprised if they were interested in absorbing up a bunch of cash when they're going to be giving cash to their own guys like the Puka Nakuas and the Byron Youngs and the Kobe Turners and the all those kinds of players, the Steve Avilas of the world. So I would say Minnesota, Indianapolis, Atlanta, Cleveland, Arizona, New York, and Las Vegas are teams to know. Where is their intersection with that list and the salary cap space for 2026? We'll get into that on the other side of the break. Make sure you guys stick with us. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to hand things off and move on throughout your day. With TurboTax full service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert start to finish without the stress of guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They handle everything for you. It's a huge time saver. It gives real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling it for you. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in if a TurboTax expert did not file for you last year. You have a week and a half to file for this deal. File by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate. Get back to your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. Okay. So where is the overlap with cap space teams with the teams that we just identified? The Titans and the Raiders and the Jets are in the top 4 in cap space. The Titans have over $100 million in cap space. The Raiders have $91.5 million in cap space. The Jets have $79 million in cap space. There's a pretty stark drop-off after the top 6 teams. It's Titans, Raiders, Chargers, Jets, Commanders, Seahawks above $60 million. And, the first 4 of those teams are effectively $80 million or more. By the time you get to the 7th team down on the list, it's the Bengals. They have 53, then the Rams at 45. The Cardinals are at 39. The Colts are at 35. The Falcons are at 26. The Browns are at 3. So not a lot of forgiveness in the way of Cleveland. And that can get even worse because the David Njoku contract has yet to void. And they pushed back, was it Joel Bitonio's contract? Like the deadline for that contract, the void to accelerate like another $18 million in dead cap for that contract. That all rolled up as well. So the Browns are in a tough spot. The Titans, the Raiders, and the Raiders are interesting because they are kind of starting from scratch, square one. They took a reclamation quarterback in Sam Darnold, right? And with Clint Kubiak, and had the success that they did. And now Kubiak's coming into Las Vegas to be the head coach of that football team with Fernando Mendoza. Some of the strengths of Mendoza, RPOs. Right? That was a Tua strength. Some of the strengths of the Kubiak offense would be the under center, run heavy, play action, heavy personnel. Those are things I think can play with Tua. Now, would the Raiders want to do the short-term backup there? And what kind of draft pick would you need to incentivize with the Raiders for them to have an interest of you're probably doing a pick swap, but they're moving up several rounds in the draft? Las Vegas has 1, 36, 67, 102, 117, 134, and then 174, 181, 184, and 220. This is a tough part of this for Miami is, this probably has to involve pick 43. Whether that's 43 moving back. And if it's 43 moving back, a team like the Raiders, who has their first 4th round pick, they've got 3, is 102. You're talking about going back like 60 spots in the order, and this is always a dangerous game, but I'm going to pull out the calculator here because I do have the trade value chart out. So the Dolphins pick, according to the Jimmy Johnson model, is 470 points. The Raiders pick at 102 is worth 92, so it's a difference of 378 points. That's valued as a pick in the 50s for trade value. And the Osweiler deal ended up being valued as a 3rd round pick. So that would be pretty rich. And I don't think just doing a pick swap from 43 to 67, I don't know that that's really going to be inspiring in a way that would get a deal done. And it's not like you can involve the earlier picks because that same proportion is going to be a sliding scale that exists, and you don't want to involve 11 for a deal like that. And this is where it gets messy because if you're talking about, okay, well, we'll do a lesser pick, but we're also going to pay the cash. So you'll pay, hypothetically, say you'll pay $20 million off of it. And then that way you only lose $10 million in cap space right now for what he's scheduled to be on the books for if you trade him before the draft. And then you trade a 2 for a 4, or you trade a 3 for a 5, and trade back at like that steep, you're paying a hefty, hefty price. If they were to do 75, which is worth 215 points, and then the Raiders have a comp 5, geez, at 174, what would you get for the comp 4? What's the value on that pick? Which would be 134, would be 39 points. So 215 minus 39, 176. That on the trade value chart is valued as the 83rd or 82nd pick in the NFL draft. To go from the early 3rd round to the comp pick range in the 4th round, and then pay $20 million and lose $10 million in cap space. Now, obviously, you save $30 million. With the Raiders, there needs to be an interest there too. But these are the kinds of conversations and layers that go into somebody buying out the pick or buying out the contract and bailing you out and you having to do so with a pick. I could probably wrap my head around and digest and be comfortable if it doesn't involve 11 or 43. Now, if you wanted to just get a team to take the whole contract, you're probably talking like trading down from 11 to wherever a team's next pick was and getting first round value in that regard, or sending 43 altogether. That's tough, right? Like that's the kind of offload that I'd be real Joe Philbin queasy about. Now, if you told me because they have the 3 third-round picks, if they could make 75 the starting point, and then they could get a pick back, so you're not losing raw picks, you're just losing leverage in the order, but you've got picks at 87 and 90 that can make some of that up, and then you still have 11 and 43 to maybe try to facilitate a trade down and get some of that top 100 picks back in the back round of that top 100. I think that's probably where I could digest it and stomach it. But then there's also the point of like, what's the dollar amounts that you associate with that? There's only really a handful of teams that kind of have the you-know-what money in cap space this year to do it. And that's the Titans, the Raiders, the Chargers have it, but, Mike benched Tua. I don't think there's any chance that happens. And then I'd be very surprised if the Jets were interested, as being a team that's seen him up close and is in division. I'm sure the Dolphins wouldn't be super eager about helping the Jets out either. I wouldn't say that I would like blacklist the Jets from this conversation. I just think the fact that it's in division probably doesn't help your cause even more. So I think Tennessee and Las Vegas are probably your 2 best bets, where, Tennessee had the number 1 overall pick last year. They're probably going to be looking to move on from Will Levis. Could they throw Will Levis as like a sweetener on the pick swap, do a pick swap and a quarterback swap, just to get another guy in here to compete? And I don't have any expectations that Will Levis is going to work out, but when he was working with Liam Cohen in Tennessee before he came out in the draft, like, he had a good season that year. You got to tame the stallion a little bit with that one. And it's a toolsy guy with athleticism that missed all of last year with a throwing shoulder injury. I might want to at least see. So maybe that, like, the Titans one, I think is the best intersection of, they already have the quarterback. They've got enough cap space where they could, bring him on for a year and restructure a little bit of out and restructure some of the money. And I think they have the most to play with. So what do the Titans have from a draft pick perspective? Tennessee picks 4th, 35th, 66th, 101st, 140th, and 142nd. So they're kind of obviously in that same range as Las Vegas, but they don't have the extra 4th round pick that Las Vegas does. Well, they don't have the extra 4th round pick. They actually have an early 5th round pick, courtesy of the Jets from the Jarvis Brownlee trade. So if you're going to get a team to buy, and Luke Braun from Locked On Vikings had me on, and obviously Minnesota picks 18th in the draft order, and Minnesota's got a dire need for somebody with some starting experience. You could argue there's some overlap. They've got 2 third-round picks. They would be a candidate for me, Minnesota, probably after in the summertime for 2027 compensation. If you were to take it that long and take it the distance, because at that point, right now, the appeal for the Dolphins with any kind of draft pick compensation that's exchanging is you get the pick before the other team gets the player on the field. Where those roles reversed, if it's a summertime trade, the team that's acquiring the player gets the upfront value, and the team that's trading two away has to wait to get the payoff because they have to wait until next year's draft. And then the appeal of obviously in the summertime is you don't have to worry about the cap gymnastics and juggling and restructuring of contracts and extending guys just to get cap compliant like you probably would have to if you were to do Tua early on the front end of this. The challenge, of course, in Minnesota is Brian Flores' existence as the defensive coordinator there. I can't imagine those two guys are going to have each other over Thanksgiving if Tua is playing on the Vikings next year. But the Vikings are also a super high cash spend team. So Minnesota strikes me as a team that, sure, the Kevin O'Connell fit, I think does make some sense, but they spend as much cash in the NFL as anybody has under Kwesi, who's obviously now out as the GM there. They are probably, if they're going to bring on Tua, they're going to need the Dolphins to take a higher percentage, which means that the pick swap thing is probably null, and that makes it a summertime opportunity. And do you wait that long? Right? There's a lot of layers here. Makes it really complicated and a lot of fun to kind of explore, but I know everybody's kind of hoping for some semblance of what this resolution is going to end up being. The Athletic put out a top 100 free agents list that I'm going to touch on here on the other side of the break. Make sure you guys stick with this. If you've ever hoped to get to the NBA Finals and experience it live and in person, boy, do I have good news for you. FanDuel is giving you a chance to turn that dream into a reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use your profit boost on any NBA future. You automatically get entered for a shot to win a trip to the NBA Finals for two. That's flights, tickets, and the whole experience. So if you've been looking at the board and trying to figure out which team can make that deep run, this is a perfect time to lock it in. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Make sure I don't do an entire Tua-pilled contract episode, right? So the Athletic put out a list of free agents, and this is courtesy of Daniel Popper, and it's the top 150 free agents in the NFL. I thought it was interesting to see which Dolphins made the list. It was not a strong representation for the Dolphins, as you would expect. I was also surprised that Rasul Douglas did not make the list. That stood out to me. Because I think Rasul Douglas is probably he's certainly top 100 free agent for me with the way that he played this year. The Dolphins did have three players on the list. Their names were Tyreek Hill, as you might expect. He came in at 131st on the list, just in front of Asante Samuel Jr., Nick Scott, Vidarian Lowe, Kareem Hunt, Marcus Mariota, Isaiah Pacheco, Trey Pipkins, Marquise Brown, Christian Kirk, Kendrick Bourne. Would not be surprised if this is kind of the area of free agency that the Dolphins go shopping in. But Tyreek, the question is, when's he going to be ready to play? It's very difficult to say. Greg Dulcich made the list at 113. Some of his contemporaries included Draymond Jones, Kingsley Enikbare, Kobe Durant, Cordell Flott, Sebastian Joseph Day, Arden Key. There's some good players in this group. I think the Dolphins would be fortunate to have the ability to go get a couple of those guys. How they choose to handle the Tua situation and Austin Jackson and Minka Fitzpatrick and Jordan Brooks and Aaron Brewer. And those guys are going to determine how many players above that $2.5 million line that we talked about yesterday on the show do they want to spend? Do they want to spend any? Do they not want to spend? Do they not want to go above $2 million? And We'll just kind of fill up with probably talented guys that haven't worked out in other places. Do they want high floor guys? Do they want guys with injury risks? Preferably not, right? It's a tough group. The top player for Miami was Darren Waller. He came in 88th. And what a treat it might be for the Dolphins if Darren Waller plays next year and signs somewhere else in free agency. Because I think with the production, the touchdown production he had, and how good he looked when he played, fully acknowledge he's not for Miami at this stage. But he did not look like a player who was retired the year before. He can still go. What a treat it might be for a Dolphins team that may not be players at all above that $2.5 million line to potentially get a few extra draft picks courtesy of that dreaded compensatory pick formula, right? I'm not trying to game the system this year, however the chips fall or however they fall. But the Dolphins have probably, the number of contracts that the league measures is going to ultimately dictate this. And we'll find out in the next 2 weeks or so. Depending on how many number of contracts the league calculates, this is courtesy of overthecap.com, in the formula for qualifying players across the NFL, the Dolphins do have an outside chance of still gaining that Javon Holland compensatory fourth. If they count too many contracts, then the Dolphins will have too many players that qualify in the 7th round range, and you will cancel out a 4th or 5th round compensatory pick for players that were 7th round values. And then, of course, the two big players that you did sign in free agency that were big qualifiers based on the money averages were Zach Wilson, who got beat up by Quinn Ewers at the end of the season, and James Daniels, who gave you 3 snaps. It was as good as the 2024 free agency class was. The 2025 free agency class was just as bad. Because 24 got you Jonnu Smith, Jordan Brooks, Aaron Brewer. Phenomenal class. Phenomenal class. And you paid for all those guys, right? On middle-of-the-class market deals. Like we just got done talking about how the Dolphins made their living in that regard way too often under Chris Greer as compared to Green Bay. And I get Miami tore down the whole roster in 2019 and they had to kickstart it up. And I understand the context there, but it's still the principle of the team building principle of tearing the whole roster down and then spending to build it back up is going to create more variance and more sunk cost and more swings of the bat that end up as misses that are not cheap misses to move on from. Right? If anything, it's an argument against this idea that we got to shred the whole roster through the paper shredder and come in with a bare bones roster and be intentionally bad for 2026 and start to build it up. And we'll have a bunch of cap free space and free agency and go sign a bunch of players like they did last time. As you go back and look at that 2020 class, I get it was by design to be that, and they lost a blank ton of money. Kyle Van Noy was 1 and done. Byron Jones was 2 and done? Eric Flowers was 1 and done. Shaq Lawson was 1 and done. You go right down the list. A tough class. For a lot of guys that got a lot of money. 5-6 years ago, too. So Darren Waller, top guy per the Athletics top 150. Rasul Douglas is snub. I'd have Rasul Douglas as the number 1 free agent leaving the Dolphins this year. That's just me. That's going to do it for us here today on the show. Appreciate you guys checking out Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Come on back, see me again tomorrow. We got 2 more shows at least this week. Looking forward to diving more into this Dolphins offseason, and I hope to see you then. Fins up.